Welcome everybody. This is now live streaming on pretty much everything: Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Periscope, Facebook members only lounge. I'm not doing it to Instagram because it makes you do it in portrait mode, which doesn't work. So apologies to the Instagram people after the fact. Um, Welcome to what was should have been episode 2 of How to Build a Trench Gun, where Scott took a hacksaw that was Model 12 and then was going to put all kinds of cool doodads on it to make it look cool. Um, Unfortunately, the parts didn't arrive, so he's not going to do that tonight. So if you were expecting to see cool shotgun stuff, you're not going to see it. That said, he does have how to do interesting things with crap guns you find in pawn shops. So we'll talk about that. But he was just showing us before I went live the end result of last week's hacksaw job. And if you got questions, drop them into the Zoom chat. If you're on Discord, drop them into the appropriate Discord channel there. And if you're on any of the other channels, we're not paying that much attention to those for chat. So get yourself to one of the ones that we're already paying attention to, and we'll try to answer your questions. Otherwise, we'll answer your questions after the fact. Scott's pretty good about going out to YouTube and out to the other places and looking and seeing if anybody's got something silly to say or actually a reasonable question. That being said, I think I'm ready to rock here, Scott. So I'm going to turn it back over to you if you want to show us a little bit more about the shotgun, and then launch into your bargain basement presentation.
All right. Yeah, well, thanks for calling or showing up. I'm sorry the trench gun parts are somewhere in transit, I believe, and we've had so many forest fires and so much smoke in the air that the city's been virtually shut down and nothing. Mail's getting delivered, but sporadically, and it's kind of a mess here right now. But this is the shotgun I cut down. It's empty. There's a chamber flag in there. But where we left off is I had just cut the barrel and was finishing, starting to finish it off. But here's the finished result. I don't know how focused that is, but it's been squared off with files and sanded down and basically ready for what's next. I usually take a square like this as a little carpenter square, and you can see that it's square. The barrel is cut flush and square, and it's to the length specified in the instructions. But that's it, ready to go. I might polish it up a little bit more, but I need to sand it down to 320 grit, and then I'm going to re-blue the whole gun. And right now I've got some bluing experiments on the bench. Here's the piece we cut off last week. I took all the blue off of it, and you can do that by just soaking it in vinegar and sanding it very, very lightly. And this has got some rust bluing compound on it, so I'm just waiting to see how that comes out. And I'm going to play with it until I get it perfect, and then when I redo the whole gun, it should come out pretty nice. But so that's what I use this piece for, because it's the same metal, so it'll be a good indication. But the thing is, you got to be careful sanding. You don't want to wipe out any proof marks or labels or stampings on the barrel. I don't want to round off those edges. So I'd rather use a chemical to strip the bluing off and sand as lightly as possible. But anyway, that's the status of that project. Let everybody know as soon as the pieces get here, and we'll finish that thing. Tonight, I thought I'd go over kind of a fun project, and people ask me, they heard about like tearing into old guns or, working on them. They're afraid they're going to screw something up or, break something. And so I thought I'd show a little project to you that this is an auction gun. It's a H&R. It's called the American Action, and it was non-functional, and it was $20. And with a CNR FFL, they can just send it to my house. I don't need to do a transfer on it or anything. It's so old. I don't know there's no real historical significance to it, but it's kind of a project. And Harrington and Richard Johnston are two companies that made these types of guns for many, many years, and there's billions of them out there. And so they're kind of fun. If you see one really cheap, often people will give them to you because they don't work. There's, oh, I have this old gun. Do you want it? My kids play with it because the cylinder doesn't turn or the trigger's broken off or whatever. You can source parts for these things and get them back up and running. This thing, when I got it, I just wanted to I took the cylinder out to show that it wasn't loaded. But when I got it, I'll show you the state that it was in and what I've done to it. And I'm going to take it apart and show you how to kind of diagnose some of this stuff. Let me get this spring lined up. This spring was one of the problems. This little takedown spring was not there. So the rod that holds the cylinder in place just free floated. It wouldn't stay in there. Now this gun is made to spin like that. This is made in probably about 1898, so it didn't stop, but it had no single action, so it wouldn't stay locked back, and the timing was messed up, so the cylinder didn't line up with the barrel. So it was pretty well useless as a firearm. But for about $30 in parts, I managed to get it up and running again. And I figured I'd show you how I diagnosed it and, how to fix one of these things. Let me see if I can find the old parts. I have them on the bench somewhere. I had them set aside, but or I can just explain them to you as I get in there. So I'm going to go ahead and just start taking it apart, and I'll show you usually when you're timing, when the cylinder doesn't line up with the barrel on the gun, that's usually a problem with the hand, which is the hand when we get this gun apart. And so I figured what I did is I went out on the internet during the auction and tried to find parts for this gun. And Gun Parts International had them, and I had a suspicion that it was a hand, so I was able to make sure that there was one in stock. And then I suspected the lifter had problems as well. But I was showing Ed this book prior. I don't know if you can see that. It's called the Encyclopedia of Modern Firearms, Parts and Assembly. It's by Brownells. It's been around for 1 million years, but it has diagrams and exploded drawings of really tons of these old guns, old revolvers, shotguns, rifles. And it's really nice to match up what you're seeing with what, a picture of something on eBay. eBay's got a lot of parts for these old guns. And a lot of people don't know what they are. They just know they're old H&R, pistol parts. So they throw a batch of them out there on eBay, and they don't know that it's the hand or it's the lifter or it's whatever spring. And so you can take this and compare these pictures to what you're seeing, and have a good idea. And I couldn't find one. This is 38 S&W is the caliber. I couldn't find specific parts for 38 S&W, but I took they had parts for 32 S&W, and so I guessed that the parts were the same. I couldn't imagine why you would use different lock assembly components for those two calibers. And so I bet right, and I got the parts, and they went right in and fixed my problems. So I'm gonna go ahead and take it apart. First thing is I'm gonna pull out this pin, drop the cylinder out like that. So I took this apart and I cleaned it up. I just got all of the crud off of it. And then I went back with a hammer and a piece of hardened steel, and I tried to straighten out. I didn't want to file or remove any steel. It was there originally for a reason. I just tried to put it back where, a lot of these were rounded off and had big burrs in them. So I just took, some hand tools and took some time and just straightened these out. And then from here, I'm going to take the hammer out, which takes just regular flathead screwdriver. Now let's take the grips off first, show the whole thing. And this is where a set of good screwdrivers is really handy, because you have all these different bits, and these screws are tiny on this gun as far as the width of the screw slots. They're really, really narrow. So regular old household screwdrivers don't fit it very well. And then one thing about these old guns, a lot of these old revolvers and some modern Rugers have these little pins right here, these little index pins that correspond to this pin on the frame. Be careful getting these old grips off, because you will damage the grip, with these little pins. So be careful and try to, if you have trouble, get a razor blade or something very thin and just come in here and pry them up straight up. Don't, leverage them one way or the other, because you'll break stuff. So anyway, just a word of caution. So I'll go ahead and take that out. And then the mainspring here, we have a history of mainsprings on this channel, but I'm going to go ahead and take this out and just remember the orientation of it. It's always a good idea to just take a picture of stuff before you take it apart. But this one comes out pretty easy. It's not under a lot of tension. What I'm going to do is it fits into this slot on the frame, and I'm going to push it out this way. So like that. So that's the mainspring. And it's in pretty good shape. As far as I could tell, it's got some wear on it, but now I'm going to take the hammer out. Is this screw in the side, and it just unscrews. And that's the fun part of this gun. I wasn't worried that I was going to screw something up or break something, because I really didn't care. It was a $20, and I figured if nothing else, it'll be a parts gun to fix something else down the road. Springs are always good to salvage out of old stuff, because making springs is pretty difficult. But if you can repurpose some of them, I did that with this gun. There's a couple of springs in here that weren't made for it, but I managed to salvage them out of other things to get the gun working. So I'm going to go ahead and take this apart slowly. And be careful with these screws as well, because the threads on some of this stuff is really, really fine. And so you don't ever want to force, or, if things don't go smoothly, take it apart and figure out why. They will strip or cross thread very, very quickly. So I'm going to get a different bit. I got a different set of bits here that might be better, a little narrower. Let's see, there we go. But there's very few parts to one of these, so it's not that big a deal. And that out of there. Come on. Anyway, yeah, I've got a bid out there right now on a Colt Detective Special, which would be a really nice little gun, and they say it doesn't work, but I know for a fact that I can get all the parts for one, so I'm not too worried about it. It'd be fun to get that up and running, and it'd actually be profitable, because they're worth a fair bit of money in any condition, and as long as the bluing and the finish is good on it, it should pay dividends. So pull that screw out, but you can see just how fine. Let me get something here, but you can see just how little thread there is and how fine those threads are. So you got to be really careful with those types of screws. But at that point, your hammer just sort of lifts out of the way. So, well, we'll take the pins out, and then the whole thing will come apart. So you have 3 pins, one here, and one here, that we need to drive out, and then the guts will just fall out of this gun. And so I'm going to use my pin block, and then that way I can drive these straight down in there, and they're sort of captured so they don't go flying off into space here. And just tap lightly. And sometimes these, a lot of these guns are full of rust and corrosion. And so it might take a little bit of soaking with Croil or something like that to get out, to get these pins to move. But the pins are available if they're damaged, or, for whatever reason you need to replace one. Sometimes they're missing, and people have replaced them with nails and all kinds of crazy things. So let's go ahead.
While you're pulling that out, we had a question in the Discord about dealing with mistiming or misalignment.
Uh-huh.
After you diagnose and repair and it looks good, How do you safely test it to make sure the alignment is correct without actually shooting live rounds through it? Because who knows if it's 100% correct?
Well, you can a lot of times look straight down the bore, and I use like a little pick, and I go down there and I feel for any kind of occlusion, around the where the barrel meets up, and then I close my eyes and shoot. But so the parts that were broken in this gun. This is the hand. This is the part that comes up and rotates this cylinder right here. And it was worn down. The one I had was rounded off. So it really wasn't doing anything. And then as I suspected, the lifter, when you pull the trigger, this pushes up, and this piece, let me get the pin out of there.
Do you have the broken piece out of curiosity?
I do. I'll have to when I get this gun back together, I'll see if I can find them and show them to you what the problem was. Anyway, I won't take it all the way apart. There's a pin right here that this piece hinges on, and this piece, the bottom right here, this was cracked, and as soon as I drove the pin out, the bottom fell off of it. So I'm sure that it wasn't doing its job, or it wasn't doing it very well, because it came out in two pieces. So let me go ahead and just put that pin back. But so those were the two problems. This rides on top of that pin like that. So those were the two major problems with this gun. And another problem with it was this piece was here, but there was no spring. So there was no tension on it, and I couldn't find this spring anywhere. So I took a spring, a safety detent on an AR-15, and I cut it down, and I found the number of coils. It gives it the appropriate amount of spring tension to hold this thing in place. It's not under a lot of pressure, but it needs enough to lock in, because this little detent, you'll see down in there, it has that little lip right there that catches the grooves on this rod. So all I needed was enough spring to just push that forward enough to keep that from walking out. So I drove this little pin out, took it apart, cleaned it, and then just played around with it until I got it working properly. It's still not perfect, and if I can ever find the appropriate spring, what happens is it walks out just a tiny bit. But if I can ever find the right spring, I'll put it back in there. But as you can see now, it's locked in place. So that little spring helped a lot. And then another problem was, let me get all these pieces sorted out. Down in here, the reason it wouldn't go into it single action didn't work is there's another little tiny spring right here. I don't know if you can see it. That little tiny spring was missing. And what that does is it pushes up on the sear, which catches the notches on the hammer. So let me get the piece and show you. This is the sear, and it catches these notches right there. So it locks back like that. And but there was no spring tension to push it up to lock in place. So it was just sort of floating around in there. And it would catch here, but it wouldn't catch on the single, it wouldn't catch anywhere, because there was no spring tension on it. But you could fire it double action. It would just cycle the whole thing, just run the hammer back and go forward, but there was no real way to control it. So that's where the book really came in handy, was seeing, oh, there's a little tiny spring in there. That's I couldn't figure out what makes the sear do its job. It's kind of an interesting design. And once again, this was accomplished by taking an old spring out of an old gun that I have since decommissioned. The barrel on it looked like a sewer pipe. So I just took it apart, and I saved these little springs because you never know when you're going to need something like that. I couldn't find one anywhere. But I trimmed it away a little bit and got it to work. So that fixed that problem. Kind of an interesting set of problems. But for I think it's $26 in parts and a little bit of Bubba Engineering. I got the whole thing to run, and I took it out and fired some rounds through it, and it works. So I'm going to go ahead and put it back together and show you that process. It's kind of fun on this gun. Pull this back out. So this is the raw frame, and I got in there with some brass and scrubbed it, but it's still pretty crusty. You can see, the amount of just years of neglect. But I got all the surface crud off of it and big rust flakes, and coated everything with oil, so to at least prevent it from getting worse. So I'm going to go ahead and put it back together. You start with your trigger assembly in this hand, like so. So this hand has got to, once again, like the Webley, it's got to come up and feed through this notch in the frame, because it's what's turning the cylinder. So I have to drop this into place. I can go up from the bottom on this one. So get that out of the way. These things are always a three-handed job. They're fun, and you're going to get frustrated and angry with it. Just walk away for a little while. It will drive you crazy, but in a good way. It's a lot of fun to see them come back alive. Let's see, that fell off the pin there.
While you're assembling, another question. When you're cleaning the inside of the frame, would a sonic cleaner help?
Yeah, it wouldn't hurt. Oops, I gotta go this way.
Are there any times where you wouldn't use a sonic cleaner to clean a firearm?
I'm trying to think. I don't have one, so I don't use them, but I can't think of a reason why you wouldn't. Maybe somebody else can speak to that, that's already screwed up a gun part with a sonic cleaner, but I've used them a lot for scuba gear over the years, and never had any problems with them. So, all right, make sure that's where it needs to go. And then now what I'm going to do is put the pin in here to hold this thing together, which is just one of my 3 little pins that I knocked out. So I'll put that in there. Once again, this is one of those places where you don't want to force anything. If it's not aligned, don't force it. Just use a little punch or something as a guide if you have to. There we go. So what that did was aligned all the pieces, and make sure my hand is in the right place.
Okay. I like how you said don't force it, but then you hit it with a hammer.
Well, it wasn't going at all. I gave it a couple of taps and I could feel the resistance. So I went in and from the back and aligned the hammer with the hole, and it went right in. Okay, so there, smart ass. Okay.
For those who are wondering, a quick Google, and of course the internet is never wrong, showed that you should not put softer parts in there. Hard polymer is fine, but rubber or softer polymer should not be in an ultrasonic cleaner.
Okay. Yeah, I would. I'm always really leery of, like, I don't know what these grips are made of. I think they're gutta percha. I could be wrong, but I'm always leery of any kind of a solvent or cleaning product on stuff like this. So I usually try to just use soapy water if I'm going to clean something like that up, because so many solvents will just destroy soft parts.
I've had guns that have come with grips that looked original but were plastic.
Yeah.
Then the grips melt. So.
Yeah. So I'm usually really leery of any kind of modern cleaning products on guns. So this is another one that's fun to try to get this screw lined up and thread it in there. But yeah, if you have any questions about sourcing parts for these old guns, it's kind of fun. It's kind of a fun hunt to try to track them down. See, that's not lining up for some reason, so we got to figure that out. This is one of those do not force it screws. So let's see here. Just got to find the way, but it should just drop straight in and then thread the last few. Yeah. Just keep playing with it until it goes. We're dealing with a gun that's 120 years old here. So there we go. That's the way it's supposed to go right there. Just drop in and then thread down the last few threads. And
Is that common, half cock? Because it seems
that?
common in other guns where you have to get it into that half cock position for whatever.
Yeah, and this gun you can't even load it without putting it in the proper. You know, you can't. What happens is the you can. I love these old designs. You can see that firing pin right there. You can see that little. That's the tip of your firing pin, and it rests right on the primer. Like a single action army. So if you're going to carry this gun, of course it's a 5-shot. You'd carry it with the hammer down on an empty chamber. So it's really, for all practical purposes, a 4-shot. But you can't load it without retracting that firing pin a little bit. And I'll show you when it's all back together. You want to get that out of your way so that you can load the cylinders. So anyway, let's see here. Make sure. So you can see now our trigger is. Everything's sort of more or less hooked up. We don't have any spring tension on anything. Okay, so now this is the fun part of this gun. I was reading about this process, and you just kind of have to figure it out as you go. Let me grab a special trick that I found to make this all work, and it's one of the things I suggest everybody have on hand if you're going to do these things, is an assortment of roll pins. This is just an assortment I picked up off of Amazon, I think, and they come in super handy for all kinds of things. But this is the only thing I could find that would work for this instance. And I don't remember how much the whole assortment is. It has a bunch of giant ones in there that I probably never use. But what happens is this sear sits in here like that. Okay. And then you have to put this whole thing into the gun. And with a slave pin to align everything, and I could not get it to work without doing this. So I put the roll pin in there. See, it's locked that in there. It's keeping it in place. And then now I can put it in the gun where it needs to be. This is the other spring. So you're going to have to kind of compress this spring while pushing this all together. And it's kind of an adventure in every bowl. It's a lot of fun. And there was a lot of words said when I figuring out how to do this. So this goes in there. And then this spring right here, I forgot to mention, has to sit on top of this ledge. The gun won't function without that. So it's got to sit right there. And if it slips off, you're out of luck. It won't. You got to take it all apart and do it again. So see, we have to turn this upside down and get that sear in there like so. Now compress that spring right here.
Yeah, we can't see. There you go. Back in.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
It doesn't look like these guns were ever meant to be taken apart by.
I think they were meant to be thrown in a dumpster when they were done. Honestly, I honestly think they were just cheapy Saturday night specials. But it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun to reverse engineer it and figure it out. So what I do is I've learned to take my pin and put it back in there and hold this front one down. So just a little bit. And now I can push this one where it needs to go, I think. Let's see here if I can get that in there. Like so. Get it lined up. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to drive that roll pin out. Let's see, there's my little pin. So I got to hold, got a pretty good grip on this. I'm going to tap this in and drive that roll pin out right there. So that was the trick I figured out to make that work. So in just a second, I think our spring slipped off because our trigger. Oh, maybe not. All right, let's put the mainspring in and see how we did. So these are always fun to mess with too. Some are under extreme tension and some aren't bad. This one isn't bad, but some of them are pretty miserable to try to work with here. So let's go ahead and, there we go. Nope, see, it's not working. There we go. There we go. All right. So that's the lock work in one of these things. It's pretty straightforward. You will.
So you say.
Well, after tinkering around with it, like, you know, it's not. It wasn't just an hour of tinkering around and voila, it worked. It took me a couple of evenings of frustration and walking away from it, and then rethinking the problem, like that little sear pin. You know, like, how am I going to get that back together? And then it occurred to me to make I was trying to find a little piece of an old pin or something that I could make a slave pin out of. And I remembered I had these roll pins, and this was the perfect size. I didn't want anything tight that was going to create a lot of friction. I wanted something that would just loosely hold it together and then freely drop out the other side. And that worked really well. Having that selection of roll pins has saved me a number of times. So from there, then you just, like I said, I went back in and I tried as best I could without doing more harm, is cleaning up these ledges here. A lot of these were rounded over and nicked and dinged. And so I just took some hardened steel and tapped around, with a hammer and a punch, and just tapped around and tried to, straighten these surfaces out as much as I could. Now, I could have filed the burrs off, but I didn't want to remove metal because you can never put it back. So, and really the whole point of this exercise wasn't to save a cheapy gun and, put it back in service robbing 7-Elevens again. It was to just try different things and learn things on a $20 gun versus a Smith & Wesson or a Colt. Find what works.
7-Elevens didn't exist when this gun was made.
Well, robbing your local mercantile.
And
Woolsworth.
Yeah,
Woolworths. Yeah, Woolworths. Yeah.
Yeah.
And two. So you didn't file it. You just sort of tapped at it. And
I just tried to put the metal back where it belonged.
How do you avoid messing up the timing?
Well, because I'm not changing the geometry. I'm trying to restore the geometry back to what it was, if that makes sense. So
just artist's interpretation, and hopefully it worked.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't going to do any harm with it. So anyway, that's what it was involved with fixing that old gun. I've got another one on order, or on an auction for $11. It's something called a Clerk, CLERKE 22. Never heard of it, but I went online and I'm like, yeah, okay, well, there's parts for them. So, it's a 32 S&W. And I thought, well, let's get it in here and see if we can fix it. But one thing I was going to talk about, I was going to see if maybe there was any interest in it for another time. And, I've got to fill in some gaps until the trench gun parts are here. But we were talking about triggers last week, and fixing triggers or stoning triggers. And I thought we could start, maybe if people are interested in stoning an AR trigger. This is just the cheapest mil spec trigger out of an old, standard lower parts kit. And, I know a lot of people do, low cost builds, and because that's what they have and that's what they can afford. But I can show you how to make those triggers pretty smooth and pretty soft. We're not lightening it. We're not making it a 2-pound trigger, but what we're doing is taking the grit and the sort of crunchiness out of it and just making it a cleaner break. So if people are interested in that, I'd be happy to, show you.
I think that sounds like an outstanding
okay.
class.
All right, I'll put together the stuff to do it then, because what you're doing is you're smoothing out this surface and the big ones, and right here where this interfaces with it like that. And
All right, so all you've done is confused everybody. You've given us old and new.
yeah,
You've shown us an old gun, and now we're looking at new triggers and
yep.
and yeah.
Well, I got to fill time. I got to wait till my trench guns parts are here.
Yeah. Finish putting the other gun back together, for crying out loud.
I'm trying to think of
so what caliber was this again? I'm sorry, I missed that at the beginning.
38 S&W.
S&W.
Yeah, which is available. It's not a hard.
And have you shot it yet?
Yeah, I shot 2 cylinders full just at the range the other day to test it, and it worked. It went bang, and it was actually fairly accurate. I shot it out to like 25 yards, and it hit the steel, 8-inch steel plate, which I think 25 yards is extremely optimistic
For that barrel, yeah.
for this thing. The rifling is still half decent in there. The crown's kind of chewy on it. But the rifling was pretty clean. It was just, I'm sure there's a lot of lead fouling that I've got to probably attack, but the purpose of it was to just get it back in service. See if I could.
There's a question with regards to leaving an empty cylinder or empty chamber, right? Can you actually get the hammer to sit or the firing pin to sit in between?
Not on
2
this
chambers.
Gun. Some guns have a half notch. Like some of the later, I think the modern Ruger Blackhawks have a half notch on them.
Where you also have a transfer bar, so it's sort of a non-issue. Some of the older single action guns have a half notch, but the half notches would slip.
Yeah, I still wouldn't do it. I wouldn't live and die by it. A Ruger, I would. That transfer bar safety is a pretty good one. What it is a steel, a stainless steel piece that comes up and blocks the firing pin from touching the hammer face. And when you pull the hammer, it drops back out of the way. But as you're carrying the gun, it's resting on that flat surface. So if something were to impact the hammer, it's just going to hit that flat surface and it won't hit the firing pin.
My understanding of the notches on the cylinders or however that actually worked is they'd slip. Well, if you're talking about like cowboy guns or dragoon guns, you're riding horseback and then the hammer slips and you shoot your horse.
Yeah.
So
well, and I think a lot of modern black powder reproductions are doing that as a sort of a half-ass safety measure, but I wouldn't rely on it. I wouldn't. Yeah, bad things can happen. It's just an antiquated design, and I wouldn't rely on it. But see right here, like I'm going to use empty cases, but we can load, until we hit. Now you can see right here, I don't know if this is going to show up, but what's happening is that the rim, this is a rimmed cartridge, is hitting the firing pin. So the cylinder won't spin all the way. So to mitigate that, you have to kind of come back just a little one click, and now it'll spin freely and you can load it like so. So it's, I learned that as I was going through this gun.
Yeah, you actually have there are things like that half and quarter cock.
Yeah.
And some other guns, so you can not just loading but also like takedown and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Firing pin guns, empty cylinder.
Yeah.
See,
this is, if you could see in there, and I can't really get the detail, but this hammer, that spike is sitting right on top of it.
Right on the pin.
So if something were to, if I were to take a hammer and just smack that, it would, it could set the gun off. So, this is but I think this is the 1898 equivalent of a High Point C9.
It's a Jennings or a Raven.
Jennings Raven, yeah. So anyway,
High Point's much classier.
Yeah, but my recommendation is if you want to just learn about old guns, take a chance on, if it's a brand you've heard of, chances are really good that the parts are available. There are all kinds of sources there's a place called Jack First who's really good. They ship quickly. Numrich or Gun Parts Corporation is great as well. But lately their shipping has been really slow because of the pandemic. And, I ordered some stuff in July and just recently got it. But Jack First turned stuff around right away. And those two places and eBay are fantastic for finding a lot of parts for these weird old guns. And so, you know, if you see one for $20, or like I said, oftentimes people just give them to you because they're non-functional, and it's a great way to learn, you know, a little bit of armorer's work or even gunsmithing without a whole heck of a lot of investment. And you know, try stuff. And if you wreck it, who cares? It's a $20 gun. Make sure you dispose of it properly. I mean, be careful with this thing doesn't even have a serial number on it. It's so old. But you know, I'd be careful with, you know, you want to dispose of things properly. But I wouldn't, if I had one of these and it was junk, I would just take the frame and cut it in half with a chop saw or something and scrap metal it. I wouldn't be too freaked out about the ATF or anything. But you know, pull parts off, pull all the springs and sears and stuff, and throw them in a bucket. And I have a bucket right here of just random parts that I salvage through here all the time and repurpose stuff. So anyway, I just thought I'd show people kind of how this is how I learned a lot of this stuff, was just on cheap, crummy old guns. And
yeah, that's a really interesting question, Scott, in terms of not fetching the ATF to come and have a visit. You know, if you end up with a gun that you know, other than a buyback, God help us.
Yeah.
You know, how do you get rid of it? How do you destroy it? What do you do?
Well, there is a written protocol by the ATF on how to do it. And my understanding is, I think a receiver needs to be cut in two places. I don't think
that's what the Florida, one of those Congress critters that was running.
Yeah.
Cut their gun, and the first cut they did was they made it into a.
She made it into an SBR. Yeah.
SBR.
Yeah.
So don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. But you know, I think my understanding is you have to cut the receiver in two places. So you know, you probably have to cut it here and cut it back here. And then, but there is a written document from the ATF to talk about how to dispose of serialized parts like that. So you know, you can
the scope of this, I guess, but interesting to know. So you know, I know you're itching to do an AR trigger job on screen, and hopefully next week you're going to have the parts for the.
Yeah, if I don't, we could either do an AR trigger, or I could do the Beretta 92 series guns. You know, there's you know, or I'm open to.
There seems to be enough. There's enough interest in the AR trigger. You might as well just go with the flow.
Okay.
That was your first inclination. So
yeah,
if you don't have all the parts, that sounds.
Yeah,
like
I'll let you know. As I figure I'll call it by Sunday night, because the chances of it being here on Monday, if it somehow arrives, great. But I think by Sunday night I'll have a pretty good idea of whether we're going to finish the trench gun or you know, go with
the
the
beauty
AR.
of this is it's sort of become a weekly television show. So you know,
yeah, it's a lot of fun.
And then they can tune in afterwards if they missed it.
It's Uncle Scott's grab bag of gun weirdness.
Yeah, it's all sorts of stupid shit.
Yeah.
So you know what? Honestly, these are all the places it's streaming to is adults. So
yeah,
but we're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, we're on Twitch, we're on Periscope, we're on, which also means Twitter, and we're on our Facebook live members page. So
yeah,
folks can tune in.
Well, AR triggers are cheap and easy, and so many people have ARs that it might be useful, might be fun for people.
Before we get too much further and start leaving, there was one question that came up at the very beginning about the shotgun and bluing.
Yeah.
How long do you soak the item, or the part in particular, in vinegar? And what's the suggested grit on the light sanding?
Okay. In vinegar, I would give it about 15 or 20 minutes, and then take a piece of steel wool and just kind of scrub it lightly, and you'll see the bluing come right off. But it won't remove it completely. It won't take it down to the white, but it will remove a lot of it, so that, you know, in the old days, I've seen a lot of people do it. They just go to town with sandpaper and sand the bluing off. And what you end up doing is just ruining the roll marks and stampings and all the cool stuff on barrels. So I like to avoid removing as much material off old guns as possible. So, and sometimes you might have to soak it 2 or 3 times in the vinegar, 15, 20 minutes at a time, and wipe it down 15, 20 minutes at a time, wipe it down. It'll take a while. This stuff is all, the bluing process is all very tedious. But with sanding it down in the white, I use 320 grit sandpaper is what's recommended by most of the bluing chemicals. So, I just take this is 320 here, I think. I have a couple, here, this is 320. Not that you could tell the difference, but, it will leave a little bit of a rough surface on there, but it gives the bluing chemical some tooth. See, this was blued. I just rubbed some bluing chemical on there about right before this started, and you can see it starting to rust. And so I'm just going to keep experimenting with different things until I get the bluing right where, the amount of time and I have a carding wheel to remove this, which is just a super fine grinder wheel, but it's wire, but it's super soft. You can put your hand in it while it's spinning. You don't want to use a regular wire wheel because it will just destroy it. You could use like double aught or triple aught steel wool, but you're going to want to dip it in acetone or something to get all the oil out of it. You don't want any oil on the barrel while the bluing chemicals are doing their job. And then you just keep doing that. You take it out and you boil it, which will turn this all black. All that rust will turn black. And then you card it off with the carding wheel. And then if you want it darker, you just do it all over again. And it can take 7 or 8 passes. It's a long, tiresome process, but when it's done, you end up with a really pretty deep blue color. And this is some stuff that I've used in the past also for removing bluing, is this blue and rust remover. But I'm kind of a nerd, so I kind of like using the old school methods just to learn them, just for fun. So I like the vinegar. Plus, it's non-toxic. Some of these other chemicals can be pretty nasty, and you're going to want to use nitrile gloves for them, but vinegar is vinegar. And then you just rinse it off with water to neutralize it. So anyway, I hope that answered the question.
Mm-hmm.
And then some, I think.
All right.
All right. Well, I think we are at our time, or shy of our time. So unless anybody that has questions, if you do, you got like 5 seconds before I kill the stream and say goodnight to Scott.
All right.
As always, join us on the Discord server for a virtual drink.
Yay.
And, a follow up with the bench doctor himself. Scott, thank you again.
Thank you all for tolerating me. I can't believe that I keep getting asked to do it. So I will be here as long as I'm wanted or tolerated.
People actually seem to watch it, so we're gonna keep doing it until they don't. In which case, then we'll find somebody better.
Until somebody finds an injunction. Well, that shouldn't be too hard.
No, but on all seriousness, thanks, Scott, for your time. Yep. Thanks for showing us the cool shit that you got that you find on Gunbroker. I guess is the that maybe we can rename this from bench.
Yeah, Gunbroker and Proxy Bid is a great place to find this shit.
Outstanding.
All right.
On that note, boys and girls, and ladies and gentlemen, and everyone involved, I believe we're going to go ahead and kill the stream. We'll see you next week. Hopefully, Scott will have the parts by then.
Yep.
And if he doesn't, then he'll do an AR trigger because that seems to be something everyone wants to see.
Yep.
Feel free to join us on the Discord server. And on that note, I'm going to say good night to everybody.
Okay.
Thanks.